engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome to The People's Historian, a weekly podcast that takes you on a journey through time with amazing stories from our collective past. Your host, Professor of History and Professional Public Historian, Dr. Gabriel Selassie. On this episode of The People's Historian, we are going to discuss Spike Lee's new joint, Da Bloods. If you're into Spike Lee's films, as I am, you'll want to stick around for this episode of The People's Historian. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The People's Historian. I am your host, Dr. Gabriel Selassie. Today, we're going to talk about the much anticipated film or joint by Spike Lee called Da Bloods. Now, this film just appeared on Netflix. I watched it this morning, and I have a lot to say about Spike Lee's new joint. And I'll try to condense this down into about 15 or 20 minutes to allow you to get on watching the movie. And this one, I think, evokes so many emotions because it talks about a often not really discussed topic, and that is black soldiers in Vietnam. But let's just kind of set up what's going on in this film. The film stars notable black actors that you will probably all will recognize. Clark Peters, who plays Otis, and Clark Peters has somewhat propelled himself somewhat into stardom from the television series, which I think is the greatest of all times, The Wire. There, of course, is Isaiah Whitlock Jr., Delray Lindo, who starred in a number of Spike Lee's films, who plays the character of Paul. There's Norm Lewis as Eddie. We're also beginning to see Chadwick Boseman star in many, many more films, of course, in his famous series of films. He is playing a character that will be spotlighted in and out of this film. So he doesn't have a major role per se, but is a focal point in the film. And of course, there is Jonathan Majors, who plays a character in the film. Again, I don't give away a lot of the premise of the film because when you watch it, if I've told you so many things, then it kind of detracts from it. You're also going to see Jean Reno in the film, the famous French actor who stars in quite a number of American films. Now, the basic premise of this film covers just this topic of black soldiers in Vietnam from the 1960s into the 1970s. And of course, this is highlighted against the backdrop of the civil rights and Vietnam War demonstrations back home. And I think Spike Lee's attempt here is to try to bring sort of this concept to the fore of the ambivalence or the sort of juxtaposition between black people who don't have civil rights here in the United States and then going off to fight brown people in another country in another part of the world who are just trying to get out from under first the French and then, of course, later on the Americans. And so this war in Vietnam from a Vietnamese standpoint was a war of nationalism, where in America we believed that this was a war against communist domination of the world, which was completely and utterly and still is ridiculous. But nevertheless, this film features 5 Bloods. Now, Bloods is a term that you've probably associated with the street gangs, the Bloods, and of course their nemesis, the Crips, that sort of thing. But Bloods was actually a term that was used by black soldiers in Vietnam. Now, what's fascinating about this, at any particular moment in the sort of the 20th century, black soldiers in World War I often called themselves chocolate soldiers, right? We hear sort of the same nomenclature being used for soldiers in World War II, but for Vietnam, black soldiers referred to themselves as Bloods or the Bloods. Now, this film features 5 of these Bloods who returned to Vietnam for 2 particular purposes. One of them is to find hidden CIA gold, and this is gold that they've hidden because their mission was to escort this gold to a particular tribe, and of course they were shot down, what have you, or the airplane that was carrying the gold was shot down, and these soldiers, the Bloods, were sent on a mission to find the gold or rescue the gold. And in their attempts to rescue this gold, one of their brothers, the leader, Norman, who is played by Chadwick Boseman, is killed. And so they are on this quest many years later to return back to Vietnam to find their fallen comrade, and then also to find the gold and return home safely. Now, the premise of this film essentially has 2 fundamentally different purposes. One, you are on this quest to rescue or to find the body of your deceased friend, your leader, and this is quite evident in the film that Chadwick Boseman's character is the leader of this group, Norman, who they called Stormin' Norman, and then also the gold. So these are 2 issues that are now buttressing against each other, and the problem with this film is that. Now, what's going to happen here in this film is that Spike Lee is going to have to try to weave these 2 conflicting narratives into a coherent film, and the film simply just does not work. Now, I am a huge Spike Lee fanatic. I loved his film Malcolm X in 1992, Do the Right Thing in 1989. One of his spectacular films that he's often not given enough credit for is The Inside Man in 2006. Clockers, I think, has to go on the pantheon of 100 of the best films ever made. This film summarized, I think, for many people, including myself, what the issue was with the murders of black youth, the drug wars, the police, all of this summarized in a film in 1993. And I think it is absolutely a fantastic film by Spike Lee. I also think his film with Edward Norton, 25th Hour, was a particular spectacular film. And of course, we get a couple of things out of that have kind of hit into the sort of American public culture. And when you're watching the film, you'll be able to see exactly what that is. If you don't know the proverbial shit, then you are absolutely missing something in filmworking. I also thought that Spike Lee's 2018 film, The Black Klansman, was worthy. But then again, with Spike Lee, it is sort of opening up a Cracker Jack box with every film. You just do not know what kind of prize you're gonna get. Sometimes you get a good prize, and sometimes you toss the prize. Chirac, 2015. Jungle Fever, 1991. She Hate Me, 2004. Crooklyn, 1994. School Days, 1998. Get on the Bus, 1996. Summer of Sam, 1999. Miracle at St. Anna, 2008. The Sweet Blood of Jesus, 2014. Old Boy, 2013. He Got Game, 1998. Girl 6 in 1996. And a film that I think kind of straddles the bad versus the good is Bamboozled in 2000. I show this film, Bamboozled, every now and then in my African American studies classes to kind of talk about minstrelsy in modern contexts. And I think in many ways the film is somewhat of a fascinating foray into that. But just the character in the film and the way that the film was just kind of sort of put together really has a lot of lacking. I mean, I think the problem with Bamboozled is it's just that Spike Lee didn't think through enough the film, and I think Jada Pinkett in a lot of ways helped to rescue that film. But nevertheless, these films that I've just mentioned, from Chirac to Bamboozled, Girl Sick, are all just terrible films made by Spike Lee. So I think this is, again, a problem that Spike Lee has. In many of the cases, he doesn't sit and rerun the script and the ideas over again and take out material, put in material that's sorely needed. I think what also Spike Lee needs to have is someone standing over his shoulder and telling him this just simply doesn't work. Now, why this is that what makes films work is the plausibility that something that is impossible can be possible. That's what a good film does. It is the suspension of reality from the impossible to the possible. Once you have your storyline, your idea, then it becomes one of skill, filmmaking, the craft, your technical acumen that allows one to pull off the impossible to the possible. Now, what he attempts to do here is weave through this film a narrative of the politics of black servicemen in the military and women, but he just essentially barely scratches the surface. What Spike Lee needed to do here was to make two films. He should have just simply made a documentary and then made this film and then just put both of them out there. So then Spike Lee then wouldn't have had to place all of this stuff in his film that detracted from the overall storyline. And there's some really good things. For example, he has in his film the depiction of Muhammad Ali, who famously said that he wasn't going to go 10,000 miles to shoot at some brown people who never called him the N-word. That is a powerful showcase. But then what you're doing is you're putting inside a film that has a definite storyline of black servicemen going to look for their fallen buddy and look for lost gold. It muddles it. So here, this is what happens to Spike Lee in his film. The first 45 minutes, literally, of this film completely focuses on, or I should even say 45 minutes, I should say more than an hour of this film focuses on the politics. And it completely undermines what he's trying to do as a filmmaker to weave a narrative. Now, this film in many ways is caught between a couple of other films. It sort of straddles where David Russell's Three Kings, if you remember that film in 1999 where soldiers fighting the Gulf War try to steal gold, and this one has a number of interesting stars in the film, Ice Cube as an example. And it straddles that, Three Kings, with Rambo 2 in Vietnam. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Rambo films. I'm a huge fan of First Blood, the first Rambo film, and of course the books are supposed to be spectacular. But just the Rambo films are just a complete mess. These films are made so males can feel good about the fact that they got their asses whipped in Vietnam. And that's just basically all there is to it. Some redemption can be made from the fiasco of Vietnam in these films, and that just is just nonsense. So Spike Lee's film tries to infuse the politics of Make America Great Again with Donald Trump, Black Lives Matter. And so he fails to shed light on so much of what's important about black soldiers or the Bloods in Vietnam. The black children that were left behind, the racism that blacks endured, the guilt of black men and women fighting in Vietnam, killing their brown brothers and sisters. Should we have been there in the first place? Now, Spike Lee does touch upon this, and I can't give too much of the film away, but he never really gets to the heart of these important issues. Now, what's good about this film is that about the last 15, 20 minutes, the film actually does sort of make somewhat of a coherent sense and sort of pulls itself together. And so if you absolutely don't know anything about African Americans in Vietnam, then probably this film might do you some good, because at least if nothing else, you will get somewhat of an introduction into the film. Now, you're probably thinking, so what are the exact criticisms of the film and what makes the film bad? And of course, these are all technical aspects. The casting, while fairly decent, there weren't enough actors in the film. There's no such thing as all black platoons in Vietnam. I mean, come on here. No such thing as all black squads in Vietnam. There were no officers in the film. So there's no way that the United States Army is going to send a squad of enlisted soldiers to find CIA gold. There's no really historical continuity in the film. So you see some of the flashbacks, and instead of employing actors who were 20 years of age that could have portrayed these characters, Spike Lee simply used the same characters. So in the scenes, you have Delroy Lindo and several others, Norm Lewis and Isaiah Whitlock with gray hair, gray beards, and your mind just calls out BS. That's just sloppy filmmaking, Spike Lee. There's a scene in the film where an French heiress to a multi-gazillion dollar fortune from the vestiges of French colonialism in Vietnam, who takes her money and does good in Vietnam. And then at one particular point, she sees the gold and says, I want in. Now, why would you put yourself in a precarious position to be killed if you already have millions and millions of dollars? Just ridiculous. Clark Peters' character in the film, and this is Otis, sees for the first time that he has a daughter that he had with a Vietnamese woman. So he sees her for the first time, and what does he do? He pours a couple of fingers of wine and drinks them and walks out and leaves. Now, of course, Spike Lee knows he can't leave this hanging, so at the end of the film, we see them kind of hooking up and hugging, that kind of thing. But for Pete's sakes almighty, you come back to Vietnam, you know you might have had a child with this woman. I mean, it could have been circulating in your mind somewhere, and you never inquired, you never went back to Vietnam in all the years. And when you do go back for the first time and you find out that you've got a daughter, your initial reaction is to finish your last sip of wine and walk out of the house. I mean, come on, Spike. Now, if you really want to watch films that have anything that can draw you near to the plight of black soldiers in Vietnam, watch John Irvin's 1987 film, Hamburger Hill, which I think does an excellent job of that. There is a short 55, 60-minute documentary / film called Soul Alley, which was made by Ted and Malcolm Irving, which is pretty good at covering some of this. Probably the best way for you to get a sense of the trials and tribulations that black soldiers faced in Vietnam, just read the book called Bloods. This was written by Wallace Terry and published in 1985, and it is the book of black Vietnam veterans. It's an oral history. So you get it straight from the grunts that were there. So, do I recommend this film? It's on Netflix, so if you have a subscription and you've got 2 hours to kill, why not watch it? If you like Spike Lee, why not? If this was at a cinema and you had to throw down your hard-earned $10 and $15 with popcorn and all the rest, I would tell you to skip it and wait until it comes to Netflix. But since it's already there and we're locked down in COVID and you're probably looking to burn some time, this is probably your film. So there you have it, another Selassie movie review, and I thank you for listening to The People's Historian. I am your host, Dr. Gabriel Selassie, the People's Historian.